And we also have one on coping in today's COVID world, and another on de-escalating anger, which has been popular during COVID too. I'll just say, if Dan wants to introduce himself further, I'll let him do that later. He's a clinical psych person. I have worked in schools for most of my career. I'm retired at this point, and this is sort of my give back, is working for the Red Cross. I was originally going to do a little quick discussion about what we're involved with. But first, I want to say congratulations to you for doing planning before a disaster. I think that's great. As you know, once the impact hits, it's not the right time to start planning. So good for you. And also, I'd like to congratulate you on working on the critical area of communications, because as we know, if we get into something like a Cascadia subduction zone deal, the traditional communications means are probably not going to be available for quite a while. So you're in a critical area. When you think of a disaster, what are we talking about? What do you think of as a first thing that pops up about a disaster? Earthquakes, yeah. Things that strike suddenly and are pretty much unavoidable, yeah.
Dam failures.
Fires, yes.
Well, fires are pretty predictable, and you can see that coming.
Yes, yeah. And you know, it's odd how some of the things you can see coming are still largely unavoidable, or still potentially traumatic, like hurricanes. I mean, my gosh, those people in the Southeast have to watch those weather people saying, you know, 5 days ahead, well, it looks like it's going to hit here, and then no, it looks like it's going to hit here, and then later on it turns out to hit over there. And I'm not sure that, you know, that's a little bit more predictable, but I'm not sure that really helps a whole lot when it comes to the impact of it, but maybe somewhat.
Flood out here.
Yeah, floods.
Yeah.
For us, I think it's severe weather, wind, ice, floods we see coming.
Well, we see coming, but I grew up on a dairy farm in 1990 down south of Duval across the bridge, and we lost 75% of our dairy herd.
Oh, it was catastrophic.
Yeah, and it flooded all the houses and all the vehicles. So
I had to argue with our chief back then. It's like, we know it's coming.
you know it's coming.
Unlike, say, wind or ice or something.
But you just can't wait.
Catastrophic nonetheless.
Yeah.
And who gets involved and who is affected by a disaster? Everybody in a certain area, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Sometimes the question of who is easy. The Red Cross kind of gets an easy gimme on the issue of who, because we usually answer, we have a congressional charter. We have the only one that was ever issued. If a government agency, anywhere from the local fire department all the way up to the feds, calls us, we have to respond. No, there's never any money attached to that. It's the original unfunded mandate from just after the Civil War. But at any rate, and there's only ever been one congressional charter, so nobody can compare it to anything, you know. But at any rate, that's how we get involved. 95% of our stuff comes from the fire department and involves single family and multifamily fires. But the issue of who gets affected gets a little foggy, though, in some situations. Who can be people who are on the other side of some social division or some other, you know, socioeconomic divisions, cultural, linguistic. And so it can be hard to communicate with or identify those people ahead of time. And if you have any differences like that in your community, it's probably a good idea to include them in your communications network early on. Because if you don't, here's what happens. And I say this as a school person, we had to kind of hustle up when we had some problems with some of our kids in high school who got exposed to a situation. I don't know if you remember the Capitol Hill rave house shooting. about maybe, I don't know, 2007 or 8. You can look it up on Wikipedia or whatever. I was in a high school about 4 miles away from the North Capitol Hill address where that situation occurred. And we thought at first, we inquired with some kids, and we thought, well, it's just far enough away, probably none of our kids are involved. But we pushed it. Yeah, you're looking at me like, oh yeah, dream on. And we pushed it and kept talking to kids and kept talking to anybody who was connected with that incident, and found out we had 4 kids. And unfortunately, they were also the kids who typically were on the absence list. So they were somewhat disconnected, which is not a good thing for social supports and stuff to deal with trauma. Make a long story short, one of them was suicidal, the other one was at risk, and we really got a lot of good feedback from their parents, because they adopted the attitude that, wow, these people really, when these people say they care, they really do care. They went and found my kid, who was not easy to find, and took care of her or him. What you get if you don't carry that out to the nth degree is those people say, well, these people talk a good trip, but they don't really follow. They don't mean what they say. And that can be a real threat to the credibility of your effort down the road. So it's the question of who seems like a simple question, and it can be a pretty tough one. What gets affected? Infrastructure certainly is a big concern. When it happens, daytime versus nighttime can give you a totally different kind of event. And the issue of why comes up for people maybe who have a lot of spiritual needs and operate from that kind of stance a lot. But and they get kind of disillusioned or can get disillusioned. It also comes up if we've been talking about natural disasters so far, but there are human-caused ones, of course. And those bother people a great deal. And they're constantly asking, why did this person do this? Why would someone cause this much pain? So that's kind of a brief review of the who, what, when, where, and why of disasters and the sort of things we're talking about. You want to go to the next slide there, Dan? So psychological first aid is a set of skills helpful to people who are in distress. As I said, the Red Cross does it as a kind of force multiplier. It is proven to be helpful. There has been some research on it, and it is proven to be helpful to people. The two things that are needed for recovery are, number one, real safety or physical safety. You can't get to recovery unless you're safe physically to begin with. And secondly, perceived safety. And that can get to be kind of a tricky thing, depending on what the experiences of the person in question have been, the client. And that's where psychological first aid can be helpful. Dan, you want to hit the next slide there? I think you can just hit the down arrow, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there we go. So these skills are not, you're going to go through these and you're going to say, oh, I know these. And you should have that reaction. They're not, the skills themselves are not a challenge. You can do this. The challenge, if there is one, is to apply these under duress and to do them with intent. But otherwise, the skills would go down as probably normal social friendship skills, that sort of thing. These are what we hope to accomplish: calm and stabilize, normalize concerns and reactions, shorten the period of distress, speed the return to normal functioning. And there's a reciprocal effect that builds resilience both in the client and in you. So they're very critical skills. Most people recover relatively quickly and easily, about 90%. 10% experience some difficulties. And the reason they experience those are varied, but prior trauma is certainly one of the key determinants. Trauma is kind of an additive thing. If you had it before, unfortunately, you may get more of it if you experience a disaster too. Or if you've experienced previous disasters, and it's probably some of you in the fire department know, a lot of clients have been burned out multiple times. You can head to the next slide if you want. Stress, which is an effect of exposure to violent or destabilizing stimuli, is a part of life. It's a great thing in terms of getting motivation going. That adrenaline is marvelous stuff for getting action out of people. But it comes at a cost too. And when it's prolonged, that cost gets a little higher. I want to go to the next. Any questions so far? This is a little bit of a too much information slide, but I think it communicates that we're really at the mercy of our hormones during a disaster and immediately after, especially if it occurs at night and that adrenaline surge jolts you out of a deep sleep. You will feel the effects of that. That's a rather huge change. Most of our models of disasters are single incident events, which I think has been challenged during COVID because that was really, in a sense, a multi-incident event, multi-event incident, I don't know. And the problem with, we talked about you have to have physical safety and then perceived safety. There's a limit to how many times you can jack the system up with adrenaline and then not pay a price to it. So if one impact is fine, but continued impacts are very difficult for people to recover from. What goes up? Anxiety, depression, digestive problems, sleep problems, weight gain. What goes down? Memory, concentration, and the ability to fight infections. Any questions so far about that? Dan, you want to do the next one? Which brings up the question, what is a normal reaction to a crisis? And we can go to the next slide, which deals with that more. There's a whole lot of reactions to stress. And I'm not going to list through those, so you can read them. The effects are multiple. And so people may show any number of kinds of symptoms of stress. You want to head to the next one, Dan? So almost any reaction can be a normal reaction. The reason that we bring that up is one of the chief functions of psychological first aid is to try and normalize the person's reactions. Because when people are freaked out about what's happening to them, they don't make the best decisions, and they wonder a lot about their adjustment and have a lot of questions. So one of the helpful things is, simply to help them appreciate that their reactions are, in most cases, normal. And there's some things they may need to pay attention to, but really the problem is that the situation's out of hand for most people, not the person. Want to do the next one? Resilience is the ability to bounce back from these situations. Doesn't mean that you don't get affected. Everyone gets affected. And we'll talk some more about how to foster resilience. We get involved in working not only with clients in disaster mental health, but also with the first responders within the Red Cross system, because frankly, it's doubly difficult for them. They not only have to survive the same stresses as the clients, but they have to be able to give assistance. So the resilience issue has had quite a bit of research on it too, and it's there's a number of things that one can do for oneself or cue and others. Just making simple goals or achievable kinds of plans that they can make progress on. Maintaining connections with family and friends, and just anything they can do to increase social supports and all is very helpful. Daniel, I believe you were going to take over.
Can I tell a quick story?
Yes.
When I was first with the Red Cross, I took this class. And I, just like you said, I said, I know all this stuff. I want to take this class. Well, it was required, of course. And so I took the same class. We both joined about the same time. And then I went out on my first shelter. And there'd been a pretty bad fire. And a lot of people lost a lot of stuff. And so I was in cleaning up the kitchen. And a lady walked in and just tore us apart. She was the messiest kitchen I ever seen. How the hell can you guys keep a kitchen? Great. I was proud. And so I was offended. So and I thought, Kathy looked at I, and I looked at her, my wife, and we said, well, could you show me how you'd like to do it? And what we did was we then embraced her and let her come in and help us clean. And she just, we showed her some tricks and stuff like that. Then within 10 minutes, she broke down crying.
Yeah.
And then we talked. And so it had nothing to do with the dirty kitchen. Yeah. It had just a tremendous amount of stress. So that was my first introduction to seeing how useful this class is, and to understand there was a secondary effect there going on.
Good example. Yeah, that's great. And sometimes the simplest things you can do for a person like that are just to listen to them and diffuse the anger. It's a difficult situation to be in, but sometimes the people who are angriest are the most hurt and the most in need of some help.
You get to move the slide forward for me.
Okay. I'll see if I can do it. You have to hit the mark though.
All right, so we got a pretty quiet audience out there. Let's see if we can get some more. Thank you for starting out with a little offering there of a story. For me, the value of psychological first aid is the communicating to everybody, lay people, first responders, everybody, what they already can do and their inherent people-to-people skills, that if we can instill a bit of confidence that you're capable of this and how impactful, as Tom was saying, a small thing can be, that, again, Tom was saying a force multiplier. The more of us that get comfortable with providing this person-to-person kind of support in a stressful situation, you know, the better we will be supporting our community. And I really like to emphasize the part about that it doesn't have to be any high level, highly skilled kind of therapeutic interventions, that so often it comes down to just the one human being to another caring about somebody and letting them know that you care about them. Also, finding out from them what they need rather than you telling them what you think they need. Big difference, right? Big difference. And so often, you know, all of us in our roles in one way or another as helpers and in our families, our communities, and our work are geared up to solve problems and to fix things and to, you know, get out there and accomplish something. And oftentimes we jump to the fix part and miss the listening part, which for some folks is, well, in fact, we have support in research that I think it's 85% of the time, somebody in distress who you encounter really wants just to be listened to. They don't want you to take over. They don't want to fix everything. And if you jump into that too quickly, they don't really feel like you're there for them. They don't really feel like you're present. They don't really feel like you're listening. And the way in which you communicate caring and understanding of them, that's the power of psychological first aid. And that's what is emotionally supportive. And you all know what it's like when you are in communication with someone, relating to somebody, and they're sort of like halfway there. I mean, you know, the exaggeration thing is like, well, you know, that kind of thing. You know what a difference experience that is personally for you to have somebody there with you who is really present and really is, you really feel valued when you're communicating with somebody who it's apparent that they want to take the time, that they care enough to take the time. Think about what different experience that is for a person than the other part about, well, let me tell you what so-and-so did, and it really helped them, and it probably helped you too. Now I got to go, that kind of thing. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating that, but I want to make the point about how us just person to person and spending a little bit of time listening and trying to understand is so powerful. So I'm going to try and maybe see if we can bring this a little more current to what's maybe going on currently for all of us. I have been doing interviews this week with media. One of the hats I have is responding to media calls about all these school things. What are we going to do? How are we going to do? How can we help these kids? And what should we tell these children? And what should we tell the families? And how can we support the families? And all legitimate questions. And today especially, I ended up saying to myself what I was really communicating to this person was psychological first aid. I mean, it comes down to that in so many aspects. So I want you to look at these things, and I want you to think about how these elements of psychological first aid could be applied. Let's bring it home to the kids in Uvalde. I mean, making a connection. So of what value is that? How would you think that that could occur? Anybody, what do you think? Making a connection.
One of the things that I saw on one of the interviews that was done on TV is a person from the community recognized that there was an aunt, I believe, that was just totally beside herself. And you can see she's just looking for somebody to talk to. And this individual recognized that and said, what can I do to help? And as soon as he said that, the floodgate broke and she just opened right up. And that's what she needed. She was so, not getting any traction anywhere. but somebody recognized that and went over and asked her.
Making the connection,
Yeah.
making the connection. And Tom also mentioned the topic of resilience, and our bonding and connection with other people is one of the main building blocks of resilience. So addressing basic needs. So in a tragedy like we've had the last couple of days, so what does that mean? Addressing basic needs, and why would we even be talking about that, addressing basic needs, when you got this horrific scene going on, you got all these deaths, you got all these funerals? What is addressing basic needs? Why would we be thinking about that? Yes.
People are desperate to know where they're going to sleep tonight, how they're going to get to work, are they feeding their kids, who's paying for the funeral. Those are the things, those basic needs. And if you don't answer those questions, nothing else matters.
Perfect. And sometimes we get so overwhelmed with the terrific nature of the event that we forget about, wait a minute, at least I can provide some guidance about those things. And that's psychological first aid. I know that the Red Cross has opened a shelter 2 blocks down there. And why don't I walk you there? Psychological first aid right there. I mean, talk about the hierarchy of needs, right? So like, the food and the shelter and having clothing and being warm, feeling safe, pretty basic. Active listening. Let's underscore the active part. As I was saying a little bit earlier, so there's a difference between, having somebody who is really paying attention to you and someone who is just sort of giving lip service to hearing you. The kids, are on my mind quite a bit these last few days. And so I'm thinking about, all right, so here's a child who is freaking out about what's going to happen next and how likely it is. And, I'm not going to see my friends again and that kind of thing. So what would active listening be like or look like if you were, let's say you were a coach and you've had a number of your students involved in something terrible like this? What would that picture that and give me some feedback about what active listening would encompass in that kind of a situation?
Well, the coach, if that person is really good, will say, I understand that you're upset that you've lost your friends, and I know you two well enough to know that the friend you just lost absolutely would not want you to pine away. They would want you to go out there and give it your best shot. And while you're doing that, use the lost friend as the spark to make you do your best. So make the child feel that I can honor my friend by doing my best in representing my friendship with this individual.
Great.
I think that is way cool.
I agree. Great. So, what are you all's thoughts about, where do you push? Where do you back off? What are your thoughts about how you handle that with adults or with children? Sort of that's part of active listening. So how much do you push? Where do you back? What are your thoughts about how you handle that? How you manage that piece? Yes.
A lot of it is open-ended questions. How do you feel? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
How can I help? It's not telling them, it's asking. And my own experience, one of my children just experienced a traumatic event, and it was, how do you feel? what are you worried about? What did you see? And then just let the story pour out, and then you know how to respond. It wasn't, oh, here's what you need to do, and don't worry about that, and you'll be fine.
Right.
That just happens to people. It's ask an open-ended question, let them tell you the story.
So it's and all of us have a particular pace at which we recover. And it's not the same for everybody. Likewise for children, I think it's really important, especially important for children, that you open the door and you make sure that they know that you're there. I mean, especially parents who are freaked out themselves, right? And their children freaked out, and parents are unsettled about, they may be so overwhelmed they don't even know what to do with themselves. And there's the child who needs their support. And I think it's always a good idea to be open and honest with when we're talking with parents about, so yes, I am worried too. Yes, I am upset too. Yes. And normalizing for the child that, yes, this is awful. And yes, this is painful. And another thing is to not, and I'm glad you mentioned open-ended questions, to not be the pushing saying, well, tell me more about that. Well, what did you see? And tell me more. And what happened then? If the child is in a place where they need to get into the details, open the door, but don't pull them through the door until they're ready to do that. Really important that you respect adults and children's pacing of the storytelling. And we may, want to know details because we may think that if I know the details, I'll know more about how to intervene. But it's really important for that person to be given the respect of deciding what their path of recovery is going to look like, and what the pace of it's going to be, and how quickly they're going to get into those kinds of details. So even in a situation like my example here about the school shootings, there is still a place to remind children about their strengths and how they have coped in other situations. Probably they've never been in a situation like that, but they have been in some other situations where they were distressed or upset or angry or fearful, and helping them tap into how they coped, what they did, so powerful, right? Even though this situation may seem so overwhelming and so, never going to get over it, so awful, having works for adults as well. So when you were confronted with, what did you do about that? What was helpful for you then? And what were the steps that you took building resilience? While we're going to, all be a little bit more comfortable with this whole idea about psych first aid, with this discussion, there's going to be a time where folks are going to need to be referred to even a 911 call, or to a hospital, or an emergency situation if there's danger to themselves or to others. And so we're not always going to be able to handle every situation, but psych first aid is intended to give us confidence that more often than not, our interventions are going to be very helpful in reducing the stressors. But there will be times where we say, this is a little bit beyond me. I need to get another resource for this person. So let's go on. So these 3 points, I think that we've already mentioned a bit. Being heard, not problem solving, letting them tell their story. Any comments from anybody just about what I've been saying so far? Yes.
One story my wife has told me many times over the years. When she was 12, she had a ruptured appendix and she thought she was going to die. And it scared her because she had never experienced anything like that. And after the emergency surgery was done and everything, her dad just came into her room and just sat down next to her, didn't say a word. And she didn't want him to say anything. She just wanted him there. And he stayed there until she fell asleep. And when she woke up the next day, she said it was an entirely different day. Just because her dad was right there. And just his presence is all she needed.
It was present for her,
Yeah.
with her.
Yeah. I've heard that story a number of times, and every time I hear it, I learn a little more from it. Sometimes that presence is really the strongest thing. And all the words you say just are really nothing. It's just you're there.
Yeah, meeting a basic need. And I had a shelter in Republic. Remember the big fires out by Spokane and stuff here about 8 years ago, 9 years ago? And my wife and I were working in a shelter in Republic. And we had a real division of people. It was interesting, but necessary. So people who were in the building, which was the school, and the people who were out in the parking lot. They all walked around the town. Well, the animals couldn't come in the building. These people wanted to. It was kind of split. And I went out there one day and just didn't want to be outside. A few times you wanted to get out, take a mental break, but I went out and I walked past him, and the Red Cross up there. And one of the guys walked up to me and says, "Can we help you?" I said, "No, I'm just out here taking a break. How about you guys?" And I was out there for 2.5 hours. After that, it just flooded. The kids were hugging me and talking and stuff. Kind of makes me remember kind of a way of, made a huge mark on me. And it was just, my wife said, "Where have you been?" And I explained to her, and she said, "Well, good, we got it covered." But it was just that button saying, "How are you doing? What is there? Do you need anything?" And wow, it's just marvelous.
And so that reminds us about how it's important for us to be aware, and you never can tell what particular thing may open somebody up or may make them available to talking more. And if we can be, alert and aware of those things, we can be hopefully supportive of them when they're needing something more. Go ahead. Let's look at the second one there and see what thoughts you have about that. So here we're talking about, so you're providing support to somebody who's in deep distress. What considerations do we have about respecting their boundaries? What does that even mean?
I would say certain questions don't need to be asked. And I'm not sure how to put that. I know what you're saying, but you got to respect the situation they're in. All we can do is help them. But you got to kind of just let them flow, and sometimes they'll open those doors that want to talk about something. I'm not realm, but I know I can. Somebody training in a particular aspect that I don't know. I found this in so many problems that we need this, we need that. We're telling them.
You know, there's a lot of differences in terms of people's amenability to personal space, right? That kind of thing. I always remember we were responding to a fire down in Kent, and there was a large Middle Eastern community there, and it was very important that I, as a male Red Cross volunteer, not engage with one of the women without having a male family member present. There's a lot of more nuanced things just about eye contact, right? Some people are like, this, is, this is too threatening, right? The eye contact. Other people, if you're not making eye contact, you're ignoring them. And so, I mean, it's kind of a subtle thing, right? And so just being thought, when I have these kind of questions about, well, so I don't know what this particular, cultural group really, how I'm supposed to approach them. Hello, I can ask, right? And remember that sometimes we get so, so I'm intimidated about it. Well, how do I approach this? People appreciate being asked about those things. So a number of things go into that about boundaries. Hard for a lot of us to do this part about being quiet much of the time. A lot of us are a little uncomfortable with the silence part, right? But he didn't say anything, right? He just sat there, right? He just sat there. Next. Let's go on to the.
A great example on boundaries is physical distance.
Mhm.
Huge cultural difference. If I stood right next to you, that'd be weird. We've never met. We would stand 5 or 6 feet apart to talk. If you're from another culture, we could be almost touching, and that would be a normal conversation.
Right.
And so I coach people in this is, I don't know all the rules. I don't know all the expectations. Just go up with your radar on.
I like that, radar on, yes.
Yes. Some, pretty commonsensical things here about, I think several of you all have already proposed those kinds of open-ended questions. I think it's always okay. Well, I know it's always okay to ask if you're not clear. Not quite understand that. Could you tell me that again? That's an indication of active listening and being present with them, and expressing empathy for their situation. A lot of things that go into that. The one thing that I really is distressing to me is if a person's distress gets minimized because in comparison to what the neighbors lost their whole home. What are you talking about? That kind of thing. I'm exaggerating that, but you know what I mean? It's like each of us, are impacted by small losses and big losses. And you all probably already know what a loss of a pet means to people, right? I mean, so some folks who are not animal people, it's sort of like, well, it's just your what? But that kind of an impact can be so powerful, and to be open to understanding and empathic and reflecting to them. Sounds like that was very painful. Sounds like that loss was really hit you. Sometimes you really want to jump up. Doing this kind of thing is difficult for each of us, and sometimes we want to, sort of get kind of antsy about, well, I wonder how I can close this off, and hanging in there with it. It's really, I would like all of us to remember about how powerful these kinds of things can really be, and how much they can count, and how healing they can be.
When we had the floods out here, had the high school as a shelter. We had a Hmong farmer up there, and nobody could speak his language. And there was nobody to get a hold of to get out of here because the roads were all closed. And even on the phone, there was not a lot of language bank people that were among. And so after we finally figured it out, what he wanted was a pair of dry socks. He'd been in the water, soaked up to his pants. He'd had grabbed some, but he didn't dry. So I ran home, got a pair of socks. I walked on water. But we finally had to figure out what he wanted, and that language barrier, and it was so simple.
Just think about that small gesture.
Hopefully you all can see how that was psychological first aid, right? I mean, on so many levels, really. Now, while active listening is probably the most important, there does come a place where you want to help people focus on what their next step is. But don't jump to that too quickly. Make a connection. You know, maybe they do not need any guidance about what the next step is. Maybe they already know, but be prepared to help them maybe set a priority, help them decide what the next step is. That's part of psychological first aid as well. Next. Hopefully these things are pretty self-evident about not a good way to provide psychological first aid. Of course, I never do this. You know, it's kind of like, you know, and again, the impulse is, you know, I want to help, but this person needs my help. And I know what would really help. And they're there just slowly opening up, telling as much of their story as they're ready to. And my interrupting them, of course, it just cuts that right off. That last part about being judgmental. We all have our biases. And we all run into situations where we feel like people have a degree of personal responsibility for what happened. And part of us may want to get them to shape up and take better care of themselves. But it's important to be aware of those feelings within us, our biases, and support other people, you know, without that kind of a judgment, without those kinds of internal dialogue. Makes a big difference. And, you know, people can tell, you know, if you're sort of thinking about, yes, but if you hadn't have done this, it wouldn't have happened. So another important point to keep. Next slide.
There, the body language was huge. You might be expressing your sympathy, listening, but if you're, we got called out on that on an emergency scene. It's like, that guy doesn't believe me. So, yeah, so it'd be that judging.
So,
And each of us know what that looks like from somebody else. But when we're in an intense response situation, it's like, you know, all those little subtle cues. I mean, how much of communication is nonverbal, right? Maybe most of it, right? So it's like, you know, the nice words, oh, I'm really sorry what happened to you. So thanks for bringing that up.
That must be especially difficult for the fire department, I imagine, because you know that the person left the pot on the stove too long, and that's where the fire started. You got to help them anyway.
I got called at 2 a.m. for a lady who put whiteout in her ears, thinking it was eardrops. And my driver said, "Greg, that was incredible. You didn't laugh or snicker or roll your eyes at all." So trying to be sympathetic but not betray that knowledge or perspective.
Um, Sometimes it's hard to do this, and we need to be respectful of our own limits. But also remember that, those small things that we can do sometimes can have such a significant healing impact. Certainly, we're probably going to make an error in talking too much rather than listening too much. Next slide, where are we? About ready for, all right. And so, when the child says to the teacher, is this ever going to end, school shootings? What would you think the teacher should say?
Sort of the truth. I don't know.
I hope so.
So, that's the kind of thing where, where the teacher is certainly not, or none of us really have all that control over. In this particular example for this child, the child is worried about it happening again. And it's sometimes helpful, I think in these instances, it's helpful to shift that from will it happen again to how likely it is to happen again. Just a little shift there makes a difference. And I think the third item there we've mentioned a number of times, helping people, teaching them to fish instead of giving them a fish. All right. What do we got next here? This is kind of a review, isn't it? Yeah. So in a crisis situation, the most common response is all of us are going to have some stress reaction to one degree or another. But the second most common reaction to disaster, man-made natural disaster, is resilience. Do you think we all have resilience?
Oh, somebody made a comment?
In some form.
In some form, yes. And so it's not like, we have it or we don't have it. We have it in some form and we can build on it. Okay.
The last bullet point there, 20 years ago, I was having a 3 or 4 month period of some kind of a medical thing going on that it wasn't getting better, and some of the stuff they prescribed made it worse. And so I finally, in exasperation, I said, Doc, I said, what are we going to do? And he says, you know what? I don't know, but I know a guy that does know about this stuff, and we're going to talk to him. That was the best move because that guy did know. And it was something really just oddball. But this other fella had experienced that before. But my doctor's advice was, I don't know, but I know a guy, and we're going to talk to him.
Perfect.
That was great.
Not just leaving you hanging with nothing, but
Saying, I'm going to see what I can find out for you. Good. Where are we? We got, I don't even know what time it is. I think you were going to take over this and you were going to expound on this one. You were going to expound on it.
We, in the Red Cross, when it comes down to referrals, we look for, we call them the 3 R's. Dan knows the 3 R's. And it's reactions, risk factors, and resilience. And with reactions, what we're looking for is, how is the person handling the stress? And you'll get a sense that this reaction just isn't going the way you wanted it to. It's not headed towards any kind of better functioning. A lot of times you'll get some odd signals. Somebody's blown out their filters. Filters are things like, let's not talk about this in front of the kids, and yet this person's just babbling on about, the body they saw in the flood. And there's, young children around. And so you kind of sense you need to move the conversation away, and that person might need a referral. A lot of the determinants, like I said before, of poor reactions to a disaster are prior traumatic exposure. So sometimes a powerful question you can ask is, has anything like this ever happened to you before? And you can go several ways with that. One can be reinforcing some kind of problem solving in the person. What did you do before? Well, I called my favorite aunt and we talked about it, and I felt better then. Great, that's a good idea, checking with somebody else and getting some support. Maybe you can do that again. Even if it's not a great solution they come up with, if they can come up with something, you're probably much better off with that person than somebody who can't access a strategy. Reactions, resilience, how connected are they? Risk factors or prior trauma, or a person who's really disconnected socially, couldn't name a community organization or social supports or somebody in the family or anything in the community to which they could turn. So if you have to do a referral, do you have local sources for that sort of thing? Yeah.
Next question. Do you have local sources for referrals? There's, National Suicide Hotline is one. You can easily
do a search for that kind of thing. If the search functions are working. Well, you can print out some of those, and stick them in with your Go kit. But that might be a critical thing to do some research on those things before you get into, you guys are going to be the communications hub for a lot of people, and that can be critical. So, the Red Cross does in larger scale disasters does have some satellite phone connection stuff, and has a function for families to find members and for people to post, I'm okay, I'm here, and list a site. So the 3 R's are a great way to kind of screen for referrals, and having some idea of how you might handle those in your locale would be a good thing. Okay, we're down to, I'll advance my own slide, shall I, Dan? We have a lot of scenarios we can run through, but I don't know that, the best ones are probably something you people think of, not Dan and I think of. And we can do a negative scenario and a positive one. I love doing the negative one. Any ideas? What are some things you guys run into?
Probably fire department, maybe some other.
I had a a patient that burned themselves pretty good, doing something stupid, you know, and so he was upset with just striking out at people and just, you know, well, pain in the ass. And so I was trying to talk to him, and he says, well, what do you know? You've never been burned. I says, oh, yes, I have. Look at that. Well, how did that happen? Well, I was at a fire and my equipment got pulled back like this, and I was exposed to something hot. So it was only a 2nd-degree burn, but it hurt like hell. Different dynamic after that. Totally different dynamic because, oh, he and I had this same experience.
I find in a situation like this that the first aid and psychological first aid overlap here.
Oh, sure.
What's your name?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
Do you hurt?
And meeting basic needs.
Right there. Can you breathe? Are you talking? Are you alert? Do you know where you are? So we've checked the first aid boxes. And now we can get into the psychological.
Yeah.
What do you need? Is there someone you can call?
How
You
can I
know,
help you?
where do you live? How far, you know, what's it gonna take to make you feel better? But it all starts with those very basics.
Yep.
What's your name? What happened? And if they're not aware of that, that sends you in one course.
Yeah.
But if they can answer those questions, that sends you a different way.
If it's a first aid situation, though, you probably have to triage that first, right?
But that starts with that,
Mhm.
you know, the kind of the
Yeah.
shake and shout. Are you okay?
Mhm.
If you don't answer, okay, you just failed the first part.
Yeah.
But if you can tell me your name, you can tell me what happened, you're breathing, you're conscious, you have a pretty good blood pressure. Maybe I'll put my hand on you and get a pulse. But it comes down to some initial interaction and then you start to weigh it. And that's where the one diverges from the other. If your basic needs are met, you're perfusing and can talk and know where you are.
Don't you think you as a first responder being present right there with that person and they are aware of your being there, don't you think that in itself already represents psychological first aid? Your presence there, and the part about attending to, you know, the physical stuff, of course, is part of it, but your presence there, I mean, I'm sure that you all have encountered this, right? Somebody opens up, oh, thank goodness, you know, I'm gonna be okay. I mean, think about it. I mean, I'm sure you have, you know, what that represents to somebody.
Yeah.
Transported a woman to the hospital who was having the worst headache of her life. It was not a stroke. It was not something we could diagnose in the field. I held her hand all the way to the hospital. That was the psychological part. I could provide no physical assistance to make her pain better, but it was there and being reassuring. And that's all part of, it's a form of triage. We've got past the ABCs, does she breathe or not?
Mhm.
But then it's the psychological. How do I make her reassured? And there's another piece about the referrals I'd like to mention is occasionally in my job, we ask for the referral without their permission. In a little different context. I'll ask for a referral essentially without a permission.
Oh,
It's like, I'll ask for a chaplain because it's a counselor. I don't ask them, do you want to speak to a chaplain? Because chaplain is a loaded word. It means something different to different people. I just ask, they're coming. I've got a resource who's coming to help me. And it's a little out of the box. Do you want to talk to a chaplain? Oh, no, I'm not a churchy person.
Yeah.
I don't even mention it. Here's Christy. She'd like to help you. Different context.
yeah.
Now, I have a different set of tools that you might, but
Mhm.
We had a lady up at the shelter, I was mentioning the high school, that was just angry with herself because she had decided to quickly come over here and check her mail. And the road closed while she was over here. Because the flood blew the asphalt off, remember? Boy, she was hot, and only at herself. But of course, that erupted into the room. And so Kathy looked at me, she says, I'll handle this. And she went over, you guys know my wife, she's just smooth. And she went over there, within 10 minutes, they were giggling and having a good time. They walked outside. I said, what did you say to her? I said, sometimes pardon my Kristen, shit happens. That you don't plan, you don't have chances of her ever coming over expecting the road to ever close.
Yeah.
She was over there, so all we did was make it as pleasant. She was worried about her animals, so we called the neighbors. And got everything taken care of. So it was one of those things where she was just upset with herself. She said, I was greedy, I was stupid, I had to get it. There was junk mail. Yeah. So she was gonna write in the cop for junk mail. It's always junk mail.
Yeah.
Is it ever anything else nowadays?
Or bills.
That's junk.
Yeah, I mean, it's like-
What would be worse than having the road closed when you went to get the junk mail? Having the road closed because you went to pick up the bills. That
Yeah, yeah, see, there you go. Well, there's a lot of people too that were like in the thick of it, that the least of their worries is like the road is blown out.
Well, I don't know, maybe we don't really need this scenario.
Well, I think you just, people have any questions or comments, I think this is fine. Did we get any chat action?
Not yet. How many people are there?
Did you make sure they're awake?
We lost, we have Lindy and Bob.
Hi, Lindy. Hi, Bob.
Well, yeah, I just see if anybody has questions. I don't think we need to go through another.
One question does come to mind. Every once in a while, and Greg has probably experienced this, when somebody is just having a horrible bad day for whatever the reason, and they're just taking chunks and stuff out of you, and you just look at them and say, grow up, shut the hell up. When does that application work? Where do you insert that?
My workplace.
Never found it to work, but that may be me, I don't know. I'm
Work
really
with my
reluctant
ex.
to try to- I will, I don't tell war stories too much, I'll tell this one.
I was sent to respond to a big fire, very south end of the county. And on my way down there, I was talking to the person who sent me, and she said, you're going to have trouble with this one person. Everybody's had trouble with her. She's just been hell on wheels. It was a huge care facility that burned, and the management group that ran the care facility was very responsible. I put everybody up in a hotel, got them all on floors that their disabilities were okay with, and did a great job. There was, however, a subset of people who had attempted to solve the problem themselves. Even though they could get a room, they went to stay with Uncle Ned or Grandma so-and-so or cousin. And this one woman who was the person who was hell on wheels, quote unquote, that's what she had done. Nobody knew that. She was just angry with everybody as far as they could tell. But she had attempted to solve the problem herself. And what happened was, when she went to Uncle Ned's or whomsoever, it didn't work out because they hadn't been together in years, and then there were kind of clashes, and then she was a stressor for Uncle Ned, and then, so it blows up a few days later. She comes back to the hotel, she tries to register, gets a clerk at the hotel desk who says, I don't have any more rooms for the people from the care facility. And then that really sent her into action. So I got down there and didn't know any of this, of course. Nobody actually knew any of it. I met everybody else associated with the place, met the director of the care home, met the manager of the hotel, met all the people except maybe, there were about 50 people roughly who were affected by it. And I met about 45 of them the first day I was there. The others, I think, just didn't come out of their room. So I spent a lot of time listening to a whole lot of people on In-Walk's Hell on Wheels. And so I started talking to her, and I just listened for a while. And that's when I got the story about how she actually tried to solve the problem herself. And so afterwards, I said to her at the end of this quite a long conversation, I said, would it be okay with you if I acted as your advocate in this? And she said, yes. Because I kind of got a hint of what had gone wrong with this deal. And I knew the manager of the hotel was there, and I knew the manager of the care facility was there. So I sat her down with a glass of water and went over and talked to the care director. And I said, would you be willing to pay for this person's room? And I explained the situation. She tried to solve herself. It blew out. She's back at the hotel. Yeah, sure. And then I went to the manager of the hotel. I did not go to the clerk again. I went to the manager of the hotel and said, here's the deal. She tried to solve it herself. She comes back. The clerk tells her there's no rooms. I said, do you think you could find a room for her? She said, of course. And then I said, do you think you could register her? Because I did not want this to go south again. I knew what was going to happen if it went south a second time. So I had the manager of the hotel register. No way it was going to fail, And she was just, the Red Cross was the best thing since sliced bread at that point. And she did a complete change in her affect and everything, was telling everybody how wonderful it all was. And I got a call from one of my bosses in the Red Cross after that. She said, what did you do? And I said, I didn't do anything. I just listened. And then I did a little problem solving at the end when I absolutely knew I could slam dunk this. And otherwise I would not have pushed it that far, but, and it worked out great. So if even the angriest people, if you listen, you get their story, maybe even to the point where you can reiterate their story to them, and then they know you've got all the pieces of it. You've done a lot of work right there.
Yeah, we had a young man when we had the big huge power outage, remember? Site set over Bellevue High School. This guy was unmanageable, just nuts. No matter what went on, he was just, well, after a lot of very soft questions and chatting and stuff, find out he was a drug user. And he didn't have any drugs. He was coming off the drugs. And so as soon as we understood that, then we got the right people at the cross to come out there and help him out and stuff. Because they were going to take him to jail. It was really offensive. And I said, I can't take the credit. Somebody else figured it out. But that's not always what you think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I can guarantee you, if we have
The Cascadia event, you guys in your communications will be using psychological first aid, and there'll be quite a lot of that. Doing it over the radio might be a challenge. I don't know, but and I will, with a slight amount of guilt, raise my hand to be one of the people with the GRS radios, and I barely know the function of the buttons and everything, but as you were talking about earlier in your meeting, but yeah, there's a lot of people to hook in there. We need a workaround so that you guys can, the ham radio people can talk to. I've got friends with ham radios, and all I can do is listen to me on the GRS thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure the big event what'll happen is other radio operators will start to ban. It's going to happen.
Rule zero.
We got to be able to understand how to deal with that.
Yeah.
We may never physically see them, but you can tell really quickly when things are going south.
We have a companion in the
Disaster mental health community teaching team who has a ham radio, so he might be a resource too for people. I don't know his call sign or anything. Ren Hudgens, but I don't know if you know him.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's done quite a few Red Cross things, but mainly in teaching and all. But so yeah, good luck out there. Thank you.
Thank you.